Hey, what's up? It's Jesko again from AcousticsInsider.com, where I teach home studio acoustic treatment techniques for audio professionals, but without all the voodoo. Let's do another video in the series on what sound engineers need to know. This is the segment where I talk about the more controversial and often underappreciated facts about acoustic treatment that are crucial for you to know to make the treatment process a success and get your room to translate. And in this video, I want to talk about the cost of acoustic treatment. What can you expect for a particular budget that you invest in your studio? I think this is often very much underappreciated, and there's a lot of confusion about what you actually get for the money that you invest. And so I'm going to go through from the very beginning, from $100 all the way up to $100,000 of investment of budget for your studio, to see, obviously, what kind of sound quality you can get, what kind of sound quality you can expect, what the approach to the treatment may be, what kind of tools you'll use in different segments of this budget. And then I'll give an overall score to kind of the different tiers so that you have an idea of what you can expect for the money that you invest. But before I do that, I really want to help you out with your home studio, with the acoustic treatment of your home studio. It can be really easy to get lost in all the different aspects of treatment, all the details of things to watch out for. And so I created the Home Studio Treatment Framework that you can download for free at the link in the description. These are my 5 steps to systematically treating a home studio and getting it to translate. So it's all the steps that you need to take in order to take your room from completely empty to fully treated and translating properly to the outside world. And it's all in there. So setting up your desk, setting up your speakers, how to work with pores absorption, how to think about resonance absorption, when to include a subwoofer, where measurements come into the process, but all the different smaller aspects as well, like speaker decoupling and room correction, speaker equalization. It's all in there, nicely laid out for you to follow in a step-by-step process, and most importantly, telling you what to focus on and what to ignore at each of these steps, so you don't get lost, so you don't start turning in circles and having to redo things because you maybe missed something before that you really should have focused on. So again, if you are in the process of treating your home studio, if you are maybe struggling with figuring out what to focus on next, or you've got a particular problem and you don't understand what it is you need to do to solve that problem, make sure you download my Home Studio Treatment Framework at the link in the description. All right, with that, let's talk about what you can get for your acoustic treatment budget. And so I decided to create this little table here. I kind of split the segments basically into 4 tiers. And so we're going to look at, obviously, the cost of each tier. By the way, that only really includes any money that you invest in acoustic treatment and potentially your speakers, nothing else. We're going to look at what you get for that money. So what kind of approach to the treatment can you really expect to take? What kind of tools you'll use as part of this tier, where you're going to get the advice from that you're going to implement in your studio, and ultimately also where the money goes. Then we're going to rate the sound quality, looking at low-end control, reflection control, how much improvement you can expect to see in the frequency response, and then we're going to put that all together into an overall score. So the first tier is the beginner studio. This is a hobby studio or somebody just starting out, and you might invest somewhere between $500 to $1,000 into the treatment and the speakers. In terms of the approach to doing the treatment, it's all going to be based on first principles. All right? At this point, you can't really expect to hire someone to help you out because there's just not enough money in the pot for that. So you're going to basically do the treatment based off of first principles. So we're talking about understanding how reflections work, and then basically doing some basic treatment to treat what kind of reflections you expect to see. The same goes for the low end, so in particular, damping standing waves. In terms of the tools that you'll use within this tier, we're really talking about porous absorption. Yeah, so we're talking, and panels, in fact, shallow panels. You can't really expect more than that. There really isn't the budget for it. On top of that, you might invest in a typical room correction or speaker calibration system like Sound ID SonarWorks or the likes. In terms of how you're going to figure out what to do, well, you still can't hire anyone to kind of give you advice. So the advice that you will use will come from books and mainly the internet. So forums, YouTube videos, blog posts, that kind of stuff. Where does the money go? Well, pretty much all of it is just going to go into buying the materials to either build your own panels or to buy off-the-shelf panels. So in terms of sound quality, rating this from 1 to 10, how much can you expect to achieve? Well, in terms of low-end control, with this budget, there isn't really enough money to do any significant bass trapping. You might be able to do 1 or 2, maybe 4 bass traps at the kind of top end. And so we're looking at maybe 1 out of 10 in terms of rating low-end control. There hardly is any low-end control possible with this kind of budget. In terms of reflection control, you can do a lot more because you don't need such deep absorption. So we're maybe looking at a 5 out of 10. This is definitely going to improve your stereo image. This is going to lead to more clarity and more precision in your stereo image in the soundstage. In terms of the frequency response, we're not really going to see much improvement beyond the empty room, unfortunately, yet. You might achieve kind of a 3 out of 10 improvement on the frequency response. And overall, the sound's quality of a room like this with some basic treatment up to about $1,000 is probably going to be around 3 out of 10. Yeah, you can't really expect a great sound with this budget yet. The next tier up is going to be what I call the pro home studio. And this is where a lot of professionals actually live. Yeah, so you're going to invest somewhere between $1,000 to $10,000 US in the acoustic treatment and the speakers in your room. What do you get for your money? Well, in terms of the treatment approach, we're still looking at treating the room based on first principles. Although you might have some budget for some basic consulting, some basic advice, the advice you will get is going to be more specific, but it is still going to be based on first principles. At this point, you still can't get somebody to come into your room, at least somebody who really knows what they're doing, come into your room, measure the room, and then actually come up with a bespoke treatment plan. Yeah, you are still going to treat the room based on first principles, just like in the beginner studio. In terms of the tools that you use, we're also still just looking at porous absorption. So that's going to go into your standard kind of shallow panels that you might build or buy. You're going to look at bass traps, which are just deeper panels, where you might have the budget for some basic diffusion. Yeah, so if you've seen my online course, Build a Better Bass Trap, that includes instructions on how to build a binary amplitude diffuser, which is a very simple type of scattering diffusion. This is kind of the level that you're looking at in terms of diffusion within this budget. And you're still going to use, or probably going to want, some type of speaker calibration, room correction system, because it is still very hard to actually get the frequency response to the point where the tonality, the tonal balance in your frequency response is good enough to not have to constantly think about adjusting or compensating for certain deficiencies. In terms of where you're going to get the advice, you're still looking at books. You're still probably going to be reading on the internet, reading blogs, reading forums, watching YouTube videos. You might get an online course from someone like me, like Build a Better Bass Trap or Absorber Placement Hacks, which you can find on the AcousticsInsider.com website. You might hire someone for some basic online consulting. Yeah, so this is someone who can kind of take you by the hand and walk you through the steps of treating your room and come in with more experience in terms of the selection of the materials, in terms of the construction. You might get some advice on actually using measurements to check the performance of your room. Yeah, again, we're not talking about somebody coming in, measuring the room, and actually coming up with a bespoke solution. At this point, you're really talking about double checking the results. It's more like quality control. You might also be able to analyze certain individual issues that remain and then do some basic measures to counteract those. So where does your money go within this tier? Well, it's mainly going to go into materials. It's going to go into potentially getting professional advice, like I said, in terms maybe of online courses or some type of online consulting, and potentially also hiring someone to help you with the construction of whatever it is you're building. What kind of sound quality can you expect when you invest between $1,000 to $10,000 US? Well, at this point, you probably will be able to do a significant amount of bass trapping with deep panels. So you can probably get your low-end control up to about a 4 out of 10, maybe even a 5 out of 10. Yeah, so we're talking about your typical corner traps, and this kind of approach will lead to control down to maybe 40 hertz. You're not going to get very deep low-end control, and also in terms of the time response, because the effect of porous absorption deteriorates down in the very lowest frequencies, you can really only get so far with low-end control at the very, very bottom end. So yeah, low-end control, maybe 4 or 5 out of 10. In terms of reflection control, you can do a whole lot more. Yeah, well, a little bit more, to be honest. So I gave it a 6 out of 10. Yeah, so this is going to give you a very nice stereo image, very nice precision, a nice deep sound stage. That's definitely possible. In terms of frequency response, though, it's still not going to be great. You still can't expect to get a flat frequency response, even with an investment of 10,000 euros. That is the unfortunate truth. Yeah, so we're looking at maybe 5 out of 10. Maybe take that up to 6 out of 10, but flattening the frequency response really is kind of the last frontier, if you will. It's the hardest step of all of those. You can do a lot of improvement in the time aspect and really get a room that already translates well, but in order to get a flat frequency response, you really need to do everything right from the start. And as we'll see, that's actually reserved to the very high end of studios. In terms of overall sound quality score, in a pro home studio where you invest somewhere between $1,000 to $10,000 in the acoustic treatment, you can probably expect a 5 out of 10 in terms of sound quality. Let's take that to the next tier. So I call this the high-end home studio tier. And one of the funny things about this tier is that, as we'll see, a lot of the money actually goes into the aesthetics, the looks. The overall sound improvement over an investment of, let's say, 10,000 euros isn't as great as you'd expect. But let's go through it in detail. So this is probably going to be an investment somewhere between 10,000 to 40,000 US. That's a lot of money. And in terms of the treatment approach, you're still going to do this based on first principles. Yeah, there still isn't budget for a high-end professional to come in and walk you through that process on site. I think this is one of the main things that gets underestimated, just how much somebody like that will actually cost, or how big the chunk of the investment actually will have to go to someone to do that. Because this is a hard thing to do. You really have to have a lot of experience. You really have to know what you're doing. And anybody who knows what they're worth won't do this for, let's say, $1,000 for the entire project. We're probably looking at more like $1,000 per day in terms of on-site guidance. Yeah. So you're still going to plan the treatment based off of first principles. In terms of the tools that you use, we're still looking at a massive amount of porous absorption, mainly in terms of bass traps, so mainly in terms of deep absorption. You might also be able to actually cover entire surfaces. Yeah, so think about a kind of a fixed install, basically building a second wall covered with fabric that is then filled with insulation material. Yeah. So you might do certain surfaces like that and then complement that with bass trapping in other spots of the room. You're still only looking at a basic type of diffusion. You're also still going to want to use room correction or a speaker calibration system, because again, in terms of the actual frequency response, even with this amount of effort, you cannot expect to get to a flat enough tonal balance where you won't need any correction. You might get there if you're lucky, if the other aspects that play into this, for example, the room size and shape, if you were lucky with those, you might be able to get there. But in most cases, some type of speaker calibration is still going to be useful. Where are you going to get the advice from that you're going to be implementing? Well, you're still going to be looking at books. You're still going to be reading forums, watching YouTube videos. You might get an online course from someone like me, and you might again also pay somebody for some one-on-one consulting. Where does the money go? Again, most of it is going to go into materials, potentially hiring somebody to help you with the build. Part of it is going to go in the professional advice. And a large chunk of it is going to go into making everything look better. So better fabrics, better wood, staining the wood, oiling the wood. These sort of things cost a lot of money, and they eat up a large chunk of your budget, larger than you might expect. Yeah, so that's where a lot of the money will go in this case. And so in terms of the sound quality, it's only going to be marginally better than what you can expect in the Pro Home Studio. In terms of low-end control, we might get up to a 7 out of 10 at the high end. And so this is when you really have the right kind of circumstances in place in terms of the room that you're using. You actually get to do a lot of fixed installs, so a lot of surface coverage, deep surface coverage. You get some professional advice who will help you find the right materials to use, the right installation materials. Together, that might also give you a reflection control of maybe 8 to 10. Yeah, so you're really going to get a very good reflection control, and we're going to also see a better kind of flattening of the frequency response as a consequence. But we're still only going to be able to take that up to maybe a 6 out of 10. Yeah, because things like the room size, the size of your desk, where you place your speakers in relation to your desk, all these things still have a strong negative impact on the frequency response. And depending on the kind of the source material, aka the empty room, the room that you're given that you're working with, you might still only be able to take the quality of your frequency response up to about 6 out of 10. In terms of overall sound quality, I'd rate this at a 7 out of 10. This is already pretty damn good. Yeah, you can definitely expect to have absolutely no issues whatsoever in a room like this to get your mixes to translate. It'll be a comfortable room to be in. It'll look good. It'll feel good. It'll be a lot of fun working in a room like this. It will be very intuitive, and you can probably work in a room like that for the rest of your life and get very high quality results from it. And that leaves kind of the last tier to look at here. So this is really the high-end studio tier. Yeah, so we're looking at $40,000 US and above, and this can easily spiral into, well, high 6 figures, maybe even 7 figures, depending on what you're planning. And this is the first step where, in terms of what you're getting, you can actually count on a custom solution, a bespoke planning, somebody coming in, measuring the room, and actually coming up with a custom treatment plan for the exact room that you're working in. In many cases, you'll probably be building the entire room from scratch anyway. In terms of the tools that you use, only now are we looking at isolation. So keeping sound in and out of the studio. Because isolation is very expensive, it is an engineering discipline. It needs to be planned right. It needs to be calculated right. It needs to be constructed by experts. And so it requires a large chunk of your budget to do right. At this point, we can think about shape optimization of the room. So this whole thing about room ratios, this is where this comes into play, not before. Because, again, you'll probably have to build from scratch. you might have to actually, or at the easiest end of this, just rip out or move some walls. At the high end or at the top end of this, you're basically building the entire building from scratch. In terms of the treatment tools, porous absorption is still going to be a large factor. It never stops being a large factor. Most of the heavy lifting is going to come from porous absorption. But also at this point, you'll probably include some form of resonance absorption. So membrane traps, Helmholtz resonators, that sort of thing. And these will be part of an absorber system built into the walls that is properly planned and calculated by an expert to work in the frequency range that it needs to work in. We're also looking at proper diffusion that is strategically placed in the room for a particular purpose. And in terms of speaker calibration, I'm actually talking about using the actual speaker here now. So you can mess with kind of the amplifier settings. You might be able to mess with the crossover settings, but you're actually custom calibrating the speaker for the response in the room instead of using a room correction system like we've done before. In terms of the treatment advice, this is where you will really hire out the entire planning to somebody else. Yeah, you're not going to do any of that yourself. You're obviously going to be involved in the aesthetics of it and the looks of it, but the actual acoustical planning is going to be completely done by somebody else. They will also come in, they will measure the room, they will iteratively improve, make improvements and make changes. They will quality check. This is kind of where you can expect that to happen. In terms of where the money goes, obviously high-end materials, high-end labor, the professional advice, and the design, the aesthetics of it also play a large role. Yeah. In terms of sound quality, now we can expect low-end control to be somewhere 8 out of 10 and above. Yeah, because we now have a custom solution. We now have somebody planning the low-end absorption from the very start of the planning process. It's planned into the entire system of the room, and that's the only way you can really get that amount of low-end control. Same goes for reflection control. At this point, we're really talking about somebody who knows exactly what materials they're working with in order to really match the materials to what needs to be absorbed at what point, at what spot in the room. And we can also expect the frequency response to really hit kind of the target that you want. 8 and above, this is where you can expect a flat frequency response. So overall score for this tier is 8+, kind of at the bottom end, maybe just an 8, but if you really invest top dollar, obviously you can get a 10 out of 10. But yeah, that's how I would split up this potential range of budgets into 4 different tiers: the beginner studio, the pro home studio, the high-end home studio, and finally the very high-end studio. In general, as with all things, you get what you pay for, but it can be difficult to understand what it exactly is that you're getting, what you're paying for. And so this is how I would split that up. Where do you see yourself in this? Are you surprised by any of this? Would you maybe rate this slightly differently? Let me know in the comments below. But more than anything, I really hope that gives you an idea of what you can expect, what you should invest in your home studio, in your studio in general, and what kind of sound quality you can expect to get. All right, with that, let's get back to learning to trust our ears and having fun making music in the studio. I'll see you in the next video.